Welcome to Media Makers Spotlight from Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Candace Block, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with award-winning underwater cinematographer Roger Horrocks. For the last 15 years, Roger has worked as a wildlife cinematographer on some of the most ambitious and acclaimed documentaries ever created, including My Octopus Teacher, Our Planet, Blue Planet 2, and the Netflix production Our Oceans, narrated by Barack Obama. These projects have taken him all over the world and earned numerous awards, including an Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, the Critics' Choice Award for Best Cinematography, and a BAFTA for Best Cinematography. I'm going to try my best to keep this interview from running too long because there's so much I want to ask him. But first, welcome to the show, Roger.
Thanks, Candace. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you also for joining us from South Africa. I'm sure people are recognizing the accent. How did you first come to cinematography and then specializing in underwater cinematography? So I'm assuming you probably started with a love of water and nature, or did filmmaking and documenting come first? Like, which came first of those two?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much when I was sort of growing up and at school, cinematography was definitely not that was just not on the radar at all. Generally it was, if you were vaguely good at academics, it was lawyer, doctor, accountant, engineer. So yeah, I was very much heading for a kind of corporate career. So, went to university, studied law, and that was really my intention, was to become an attorney. But you're right, I did grow up very close to the ocean, and at a very, very early age, I developed a real passion for the ocean. We used to go down and collect mussels, and it was very much like part of the whole family kind of tradition. And I remember at university, at college, I got very into spearfishing, and that really kind of laid the foundation of my future cinematography career. But at the time, I had no idea, of course, that that was the path that I was going to take. So the cinematography definitely came later.
Cool. Well, we're glad that you found it, because I think we need more underwater cinematographers than lawyers right now. Anyway, so how big is that community of the natural world cinematographers, and within that, like the underwater specialists?
It's a very niche community. The craft really evolved in Bristol out of the NHU, so the BBC Natural History Unit, which really, I'm not sure exactly when it was created, but my understanding was it was about the 60s. So all the people that wanted to make natural history shows didn't want to live in London. So they set up a kind of a studio in Bristol, which was closer to nature. And that's really where you had the evolution of what we know today as the classic sort of David Attenborough blue chip style of natural history filmmaking. And for many, many years it was David on camera, kind of really defining the genre. But then with Blue Planet, I believe, which was around 2000, that's when they first kind of developed this blue chip thing where there was no actual narrator. It was just animals, in the show predominantly. And that obviously takes a lot more money, a lot more budget. But that's really where, that whole craft evolved, shooting topside, underwater. And it's certainly in the underwater space, but before I get into that, the key thing really is that you need to specialize. If you're going to be recognized as one of the best, generally it's much better to specialize than not to specialize. So for me, very early on, I knew that the ocean was my space. That's where I really felt physically at home and very comfortable because of my spearfishing background. And that's the kind of space that, I've really, really specialized in. But to get back to your question, it is a smaller space, and it's very much the kind of thing where you get work through, word of mouth and recommendations, and which I guess is the same in Hollywood to a large degree. But it's super niche. Your reputation is everything, and there just isn't that much work to sustain, a big demand for that specialization.
Yeah. And it does take a lot of skill to do what you do. And it's not everyone has the even chance to hone those abilities. So speaking of that difference though, and your specialty, what are some of the main considerations of filming through water versus air? And I'm sure there's things with depth and light and conditions of the water and all of that. So can you talk a little bit about like that learning curve and what you have to consider as underwater?
Yeah, I think the fundamental difference is that, well, put it this way, you have to become fish, right? You have to become so comfortable in the water that, the diving component is completely and utterly second nature. So that's a key requirement. You can totally focus on the craft, on the camera,
Mm-hmm.
on the character, on the story, because that's your fundamental job, right? Is to, tell a visual story. So I think the diving acumen and skill set is fundamental. And then from a cinematography perspective, you need to get close, right? You can't sit in a Land Rover and film with a long lens, because the greater the distance between you and your subject underwater, the more particulate, generally the lower the image quality. I mean, there are exceptions to that. If you're diving in like the Red Sea, where it's incredibly clean, it is possible to, for example, use like 120mm lens and get beautiful compressed images, at distance. But as a general rule, you have to get close to your subject. And that entails the ability to, dance with that subject, to build enough trust that the animal is not frightened, but also in the case of a shark or something, it's not overly interested.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I call it the dance. It's quite a peculiar skill set to the underwater world compared to the topside world. But then again, a lot of topside camera operators are working with gimbals now, where they, if the animal is not a threat, they can move super close without disturbing them. So there definitely are parallels. But I think those are the kind of two fundamental differences, is that, you do have to have, I call it like there's MMA, mixed martial arts. It's like MDA. You almost need like mixed diving arts. You need to be able to free
Yeah.
dive. You need to be able to scuba dive. You need to be able to, skilled on rebreathers. The deep diving is not as critical because there's not, as many things down deep that people want to film, which is disappointing for me because I enjoy diving deep.
I'm like, wait, people, we should be doing more down there.
Yeah, but it's very much that it's that diving skill, and then it's the just that it's really that kind of animal sense, that ability to connect with an animal, interact with it. That animal will always know that you're there. Like you cannot sneak up on it. I mean, as a general rule, like you just can't, right? So
Yeah.
it's very much knowing how to kind of not cross that line and maintain that relationship with the animal so you can actually film it.
That's really cool. I mean, I know when people watch, or at least when I watch documentaries, whether it's, like rock climbing or, all these, or on these underwater, all these amazing shots, and they get so close, and you always, I mean, I personally am always thinking, wow, how are they getting that shot? Like, who is getting that? Because you're right there in it. That's amazing to hear that you really are that close, and, because you have to be underwater. And I think it's a pretty cool testament that you've been doing this that long and so well that basically like the underwater world has accepted you. It's kind of like, you're cool with us most for the most part. I'm sure you probably have stories of things maybe if they didn't go so well. And that kind of leads me to like, how do you deal with the safety issue when you're down there in and amongst all these different types of creatures?
Well, I'll answer that with a question. So what do you think when we put together like a risk assessment for a shoot? What would you say, like, let's say we're going to go and dive with great white sharks. What would you say is the most dangerous thing that we can be doing on that shoot?
I'm not sure. I mean, being with super aggressive ones, or like having issues with oxygen. I have no idea.
No, it's driving to the launch site.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, I say that slightly tongue in cheek because clearly, when you are engaging with great white sharks and things, it's, you need to be really careful and skilled and aware and have, but as a general rule, I would say, definitely it's more risky, the driving. I think in our industry as well, there definitely have been camera operators that have died doing their craft, the majority of them are light aircraft and balloons, people that are off the ground, mountains, things like that. But that is really, really dangerous statistically. And then I think there's been one fatality on a rebreather, and of course Steve Irwin, famously. But from what I've picked up, he came behind the animal, he startled the animal, not necessarily intentionally, but it was just one of those very unfortunate scenarios that happened. So it's a testament to the underwater world that, people haven't, if anything, it's diving accidents, but it's not the animals that cause the problem.
Yeah. So, how much are you in communication with people topside or doing aerial like shots or anything? Like, how much are you coordinating when you're on a shoot?
So generally you're working, so we call them camera channels. So on like a really big production, like we went down for Disney Penguin, we went down to Antarctica, and I think we had 5 camera channels. We had an underwater camera channel, we had a long lens channel, we had a gimbal channel. I can't remember but we actually didn't at the time have a drone channel because that was before kind of drones were prevalent. But essentially you'll have, multiple camera operators, DOPs responsible for those different things. There's very little, the only real interaction is just making sure that, if you're filming the same thing, you're not getting each other's shot, but that doesn't happen that often. So there's a degree of coordination around that. But generally, underwater, you're operating independently of comms to the surface. So there might be some instances where, you take, if you're doing a lot of benthic work, like with tripods and things, you'll take, Kirby 48s and you've got underwater comms so you can speak to your assistant, and that is super helpful. And if the producer's there, you might have the producer on comms as well, and or the director. What we call the producer is essentially the director. But comms with the boat, that's very much a commercial diving methodology where the most experienced diver is topside and they're controlling the air supply to the diver. So there has to be communications. Whereas in our practice, we are diving independently. We're in charge of our own air supply.
That's cool. And you're always down there with at least one other, like an assistant, you were saying, or have you ever done things where it's just you down there?
Yeah, it's often it would be preferable to be alone because if you have 2 people in the water, it tends to affect the behavior more. But from a safety perspective, we always will have. So if we're on scuba or a rebreather, then it's mandated that you have to have someone with you, and you always comply with that. But there might be certain circumstances with freediving where it's not required, and in that case, you can operate on your own. But the key is having a great assistant who does not get in the way, who's invisible until you want them to be visible, until you need them, and it's clearly safer.
Also, just as a random factoid, how long can you hold your breath underwater? Because you're like part aquatic now, it seems like.
Well, it's funny you say that. I very much started out as a free diver, and I was very much, the Big Blue. I don't know if it's a great film. It's like it was a Luc Besson film, Jacques Mayol, and so I grew up on that kind of culture where free diving was everything, and if you were a scuba diver, you were kind of cheating, and you weren't. But I've come to love scuba diving because it's just so safe. And even though I'm very, I use rebreathers a lot, the great thing about scuba is that it's kind of bulletproof. But I did do a bit of competitive free diving, quite a while ago. And I think my best was about on the couch. So at dry, I did about 6 minutes, like a 6-minute static, which, is not world class, but it was pretty decent at the time. And, I'm comfortable diving to, with a bit of training, I'm comfortable to 30, 35, 40 meters. So that's more than enough for what I would consider, you certainly don't want to do that trying to film an animal down at 30 meters. Even with a great breath hold, you're going to run into trouble. So I try and avoid free diving as much as possible because no matter how good you are, you're just so limited with the amount of time that you can spend, on the animal.
Yeah. Definitely. Speaking of the equipment that you bring down there, because you even mentioned tripods and things, when you go down, are you able to change things out when you're there, or is it sort of like you pick what you're bringing and that's what you bring down? Like how much freedom do you have to be doing changes?
It's a really good question. The simple answer is generally you can't change. So you'll always use a zoom lens. Like using a prime just doesn't make sense. So generally using something like on a red DSMC2, which is essentially a Super 35 sensor, you'd be using like a 17 to 55, which would be like a 24 to 70 on a full frame DSLR. And that actually that's a great sequence lens because it enables you to get sufficient wide coverage, but you can also get in nice and tight. So if I only had one camera system, that would be the lens that I would generally use for most situations, or the 24 to 70. But for the last 5 years, I have, with the support of one of my producers, collaborators I work with a lot, Jonathan Smith, he invests in 2 camera systems for us. So, I will always go down generally with 2 camera systems, which means that I'm effectively lensed from, I could be lensed from like 10 to 24. So I've got a super wide option, and then 24 to 70, which gives me, which would be the equivalent of, like a 24 to 100 on a full frame. Alternatively, I could go with something like, the 24 to 70 and a 70 to 180, which just gives me an incredible range. It means that, I can stay down and get the requisite coverage. And then Nauticam have brought out a very interesting system. It's a EMWL. So effectively, it's like a probe lens system that fits on the front of a macro, like a 90. So that gives you a lot of versatility as well, because you can actually change the front element and you can take the probe off. So that gives you, more versatility. But on the high end of the kind of productions we work on, it's almost mandatory to have 2 systems because, the action that you require might only happen on one dive for like a short period of time. So the ability to get the coverage is a game changer.
Yeah. So, and I want to talk more about that in a minute, but just sticking with the actual gear for a little bit longer. I know, obviously, most people listening are topside filmmakers. And when you're up here, water is the enemy of a lot of cameras and things. So what are the sort of casings or special things that make underwater photography possible? Like, and are there ones that are your favorites, or what's your favorite equipment? Any of that?
The simple answer is that you need to take, whether it's an ARRI or a RED or whatever it is, Sony DSLR, and effectively put it in a housing. And there are many different manufacturers that operate. For me, there's only really 2 options. It's either Gates or Nauticam. And they both have their kind of strengths and weaknesses, but I don't think you can really go wrong with investing in either of those. And they, to a large degree, they have a manual interface. So, when you pulling focus and pulling zoom, it's all manual. It's not an electronic interface, although that is changing a little bit now with some of the later sort of systems. Both of them offer a very interesting vacuum seal kind of solution where you put the camera in the housing, you seal the housing, and then effectively you pull a vacuum. And then you essentially check to see whether there's like a leak detector. So in the Nauticam system, you pull a vacuum, your emergency light goes green, and then you watch it. And if there's a leak, it's going to go red, it's going to go orange, and then go red. So you know that there's a problem, and then you need to sort that out. So as a general rule, the system is pretty bulletproof, and it's generally human error. Like if you do something wrong, or you hasty, or you crimp an O-ring or whatever. But I mean, the one upside is that I do very little topside work. My body's on mint condition because they never exposed to the
right.
In the housing. So
they're like hermetically sealed.
When it does go wrong, it's obviously catastrophic. It's done. It's over.
Yeah. Has that ever happened to you where you've lost equipment?
Touch wood, no. I did flood a stills camera as part of my school fees. I changed the O-ring at night. I was tired, never do that. And it was slightly crimped, and I flooded it was a D200, Nikon D200 at the time. But no, touch wood, I haven't. But I have had situations where the alarm has gone off and there's been a little bit of water ingress due to something. Generally a hair on an O-ring or whatever. But as long as you keep an eye on that alarm, you're generally good.
Wow. It's so cool. And it's interesting considerations that, people might not think of, or they just don't have to in other situations. In general, for nature documentary and things where you're kind of just waiting and observing and trying to see when stuff's going to happen, do you use things like pre-record? Because I know you've worked with a lot of red cameras, I've heard, and things like that. They have those features. What's the benefit of that for people that don't know about it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no doubt that red cameras have become the kind of de facto standard in the natural history industry for a number of reasons, and one of them is very much the pre-record because it just gives you that ability. And a classic example would be a breaching shark. You're towing a decoy or you're waiting for something, to happen. Without it, you're literally rolling hours and hours and hours. I mean, that is very much the case on the Inspire. So if you're using an Inspire 2 or an Inspire 3 to try and film a shark predation, and we did this for oceans, you're literally rolling all the time. So I think we just shot like 32 terabytes on a
Wow.
shoot, just because whenever there was a shark and a seal in shot, we just had to keep rolling. Now, on a red, you would just be on pre-record, and then as soon as the action happens, you hit record. So there've been many instances on grip as well when you locked off and you're waiting for a specific behavior like an octopus to do something. That's also fantastic because you go into pre-record and you roll. So it definitely is a big advantage. For example, in Our Planet, I shot a sequence for Hugh Pearson in Roger Horrocks where you've got the little modulars going through the anchovies. And they would be swimming slowly, and then suddenly they would explode. So that was another classic example where I could put on pre-record, and then literally as it happened, I'd hit record and then stop, and just so much more efficient.
Yeah, it sounds like just the data alone. Do you keep all of those terabytes of stuff, even if not much is happening in them in the end, or do you say like nothing happened there, and now you can kind of
No, I
write
mean,
over it?
everything on a production, everything is owned by the production. So basically, everything that you shoot is ingested and uploaded, and there's quite strict policies around, what can be. And generally, it's just to delete nothing, right? Like because it's the marginal cost of the storage. Rather delete it back at the office once you get there.
Wow. So we talked a little bit about the gear itself, but have you seen advancements in even like post processing to take some footage and make it like clearer or whatever after, depending on, because I know like water conditions can change like after a storm or something, and like particles in the water and things like that. So I'm just curious, is that something that you think could and should be done more, or like is it like a purist thing where you don't want to use any like technology?
I think it's a good question. I think if you look at the stills photography as a kind of parallel scenario, they have pretty strict rules in the competitions around what you can and can't do in terms of removing artifacts, etc. To be honest, the fundamental thing that is done so well on these productions is the color grading. It is insane. I mean, I have a vague sense of how to color grade. I can do it pretty well. But what these people, what top colorists can do, it is utterly astounding. So I think just having a top colorist on your production and the ability to grade it properly is pretty phenomenal. But as far as I know, I mean, I haven't sat in on a lot of the sort of the editing process, but I have done some of it. But there's actually very little manipulation of the image because the whole natural history thing is very much about objectivity.
Yeah.
They might matte if, for example, the sky is really bright or something. They might put a bit of a matte on that, and there's definitely that which is kind of dodging. Dodging and burning. Classic kind of photography techniques. But I would say that definitely it's one industry that tends to shy away from that kind of manipulation.
Yeah, great. I love that. I would love to go down and see that stuff myself with my own eyes. I've done the teensiest bit of scuba and a little bit of like underwater modeling. So I kind of get a sense of being underwater for like a long amount of time, but not nearly as long as you have. So speaking of that, how long are you under at a time usually if you're on like a long multi-day shoot? And can you explain a little bit more like what some of these shoots can entail and just how much time and effort it goes into it?
So you're looking at generally a shoot is on average, you're looking at 21 days in the field. So door to door in terms of travel time, 2, 3 days either side. So, most shoots are 25 days to a month. The kind of shoots where you've got the sufficient budget to have a time, that's kind of what you need. Like that, that's so there's really kind of three scenarios. The one is what I call, blue water sequence. So for example, going to the Azores to try and film a bait ball. Now, this is something that is very difficult to find. So we spent on that particular shoot, myself and Howard Bourne were out there 25 days at sea, 10 hours a day.
Wow.
Right. And we were on I was on a bait ball for like 10 minutes, and the entire sequence, well, not the entire sequence, but the bulk of the sequence came from those 10 minutes. So 250 hours of waiting, meditation, preparation, and literally 10 minutes of filming. So in that sort of instance, you're not in the water very long. You might, like if it's a really big bait ball, it might sustain 3 hours, which is probably the max, and you might have to change tanks if you're on scuba, but generally you're in the water very little. On a shoot I did with Doug Anderson down to Antarctica, I think I was in the water for an hour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because there just wasn't the opportunity to really, Doug was the primary cameraman. I was assisting him, but, he was probably underwater for 3 hours maybe, so it all sort of depends on what you're doing. But then the other extreme is something like when we did a shoot in Lake Tanganyika on the cichlids on rebreathers, and we were doing 6 hours a day underwater. So that was either 3 hours break, 3 hours, or it was 3 hours, 6 hours straight. Mm-hmm. So using rebreathers, you are, especially in that kind of environment where it's warm, your scrub is not an issue. You literally can stay down for, you take your fins off, you set up your tripod. It's exactly like, if you could have a cup of tea, you would, right? Like, if you can't.
That's awesome.
But it's awesome. It's literally like being topside, but you're filming underwater. Mm-hmm. And in that kind of instance, you've got to watch things like blood pressure, because when you come up after that sustained time, your blood pressure is so low, you've got to be very careful about being, too physical or blacking out. But these shoots are highly managed. The risk assessments are really good. And increasingly there are protocols that are being put in place. For example, a mandatory rest day, which is something we never used to have 10 years ago. Now, you have to have a day of rest from the diving. And I think it's all good. It all keeps you fresh, and it's good. It's good for the industry. Frustrating because sometimes you just want to, like I'm here and I want to dive, right? But it's good. It's good.
That's interesting to hear, though, that sometimes you're there and you're not in the water, so you're just monitoring. When do you know when to go in? Do you have different radar systems tracking things, or how is it that when to go in?
So for example, on this is the thing with the ocean, is you can't see what's going on underneath, right? So, you can look at, things like chlorophyll charts. So if you're going after a bait ball where there's bait fish, now you want to try and find the bait fish. So you spend a lot of time looking for birds, for example.
Okay.
So you'll have guys up on the conning tower with stabilized binoculars, searching, using radar in some instances to try and pick up birds, and the birds take you to the bait ball or the behavior. But the reality is that these bait ball events are very rare. They just don't happen. So, it's a bit like if you go and film lions hunting, you want to film lions hunting, right? I don't know if you've ever filmed lions, but I can tell you now, they just sit around doing nothing all day.
Yeah.
You might be there for 3 weeks, and then they might only hunt once. So it's just very much a case of, and every wildlife cameraman will share this with you, it's the patience. Often I always say it's like 99% meditation, 1% action. But when it happens, you better be ready, because if you miss it, that's a 400,000 pound shoot that's is your responsibility, that they've put you there, and you haven't delivered. So it's a lot of pressure. But
you've mentioned meditation a couple of times. When you're it sounds like very good at waiting and very patient, and that comes with the territory. When you're in some of these scenarios, do you ever find yourself thinking in kind of like a David Attenborough voice, like kind of watching stuff, doing a little like, we're waiting for the, or is it just, do you blank out,
No,
or what
no,
kinds of
no.
things do you focus on?
No, I think I mean, if you think about it, this is kind of prototypical kind of hunting experience, right? Like, I mean, if you go back to sort of, before the, agricultural revolution, before the emergence of the Goliaths and the big corporations and things, I mean, ultimately people were, smaller hunter-gatherer communities. And that's essentially what we've evolved to do. So, I think it actually you dial into it quite quickly. But remember, it's like, okay, I'll give you an analogy. Mike Horn, he's actually not that well known in the States, but he's a South African adventurer who did this thing where he walked through the Amazon. So he circumnavigated the globe without any power, right? So he walked through the Amazon, he sailed across the Atlantic, he, all on foot and paddle and whatever. So like no motors. And I remember someone saying to him, well, don't you get bored when you're walking through the jungle? And he's like, no, I don't, because when I see a tree, I've got to go right around the tree. The next obstacle, I have to go left, because if I keep going right around the obstacles, I'll walk in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the one thing. And the other thing is, he says, if the jungle goes quiet, I've got to keep looking for a tree that's about this thick. And it's like, why? Because jaguars are hunting you and they can't climb a tree. If the tree's too wide, they can climb it. But if it's that big, they can't climb it. So it's kind of a similar thing where, you are constantly, nothing's happening, but you are very attenuated to the environment.
You're extremely present, it sounds like.
Yeah, very, very sort of present, very, very dialed in, and you have to have that conviction that it could happen at any time and that you need to be ready, because, it absolutely can. Like, I've been in situations where you would normally give up all hope and it's just no way, but it suddenly turns on and you've got to be ready. So,
Yeah. Do you bring that sort of ability to hyper focus, but to be very, very observant and very focused and aware? Do you bring that topside too? Or is it something that you turn on when you're in working mode and you can turn off otherwise?
I think it's something that, when you're on the boat, you topside, you're on the boat, but you're very much, focused on the environment, and kind of, again, it depends on what situation it is. But also there's a time to enjoy the crew, to, just decide, okay, we're going to take a break and we're going to kind of do something or whatever. And that crew dynamic is so critical. That's such a fundamental thing. And I really believe in this, is that, the energy of the crew is so critical. If you can be in the most astounding natural history environments in the world, but if you're with people, it's a nightmare. It is hell on earth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's like sailing to the Caribbean on a yacht, but the people are just wanting to kill each other. So I think, that's something that is so important. And it's something that I think that Bristol does very well, is they are quite astute in terms of that. It's not something that's done explicitly, but you don't survive in this industry if you're a prima donna or if you're difficult. It just doesn't work like that. So that's something I've really enjoyed, is the friendships that I've made, with some extraordinary people around the world, local people that are working on the shoots, and then also colleagues and, just interesting people that really enjoy the craft, enjoy the natural world. So it's a combination of both. But yeah, there's definitely overriding. You just have to be ready, because you just never know when it's going to happen. And persistent, right? Like, it's always tempting sometimes. I don't think anything's going to happen. Let's go back. But yeah, being persistent is generally pays off.
Well, you've gotten to experience some really amazing things because of the line of work that you have. I know that you probably get asked this quite a lot, but given that you have this sort of privilege of being in these like magical underworld spaces, I've heard we know more about some of our like Milky Way than we do of the depths of our ocean or something. Like there's so much to explore even on our own planet still that's left. And you've gotten to be in and amongst all of these amazing animals and all that. So is there anything that you've learned from spending a lot of time in and within and becoming like kind of accepted, you were saying, and like makes so they're comfortable around you, but is there anything that you carry with you now since you've started this that you've learned from some of these underwater creatures?
I think that the experience would, if I had been doing this topside, I mean, I have done some, work topside, but generally it's been underwater. I think it's the same, what's really blown me away has just been, the intelligence and the sentience, maybe sentience is a better word, but the sentience of these animals and how much they are actually like us. I just don't think that people are, we're so conditioned to think that there's animals and that there's humans, and that's like a fundamentally different thing, right? And,
Yeah, I've always hated that. I'm like, we're animals too. I'm like, why are you separating us?
Exactly. We symbolic animals, and we homo narrans, and we obsessed with stories and symbols and things like that. But ultimately, I think the intelligence and the sentience and also the characters. Diving, I've spent a lot of time with dolphins, probably more than most. I think any other camera operators. I've had the privilege of diving at bottlenose dolphins, and just this, the characters. They have distinct characters. It's very much like your dogs. Your dog has 12 puppies, and they literally come out and they all have different characters. Some are growling, some are friendly. So I think that gradient is a lot closer than we sort of we imagine, and it's tough to take on. When you look at the kind of the destruction and but that's just the nature of to be human is to consume, right? Like, I mean, to be an animal is to consume. It's fundamental to the whole thing. So, but yeah, it's been a real joy, and I am increasingly wondering how I can share those experiences in a more leveraged way. Obviously, I do it through these films, but certainly looking to find ways, through social media, and just because you can publish whatever you want to just find more ways to connect people to the experiences that I've been privileged to have, because it is definitely, I remember some of them, like you can't process it. Like you come home and you just sit there and you kind of, it's a very profound sort of experience to be amongst, for example, whales and have them feeding around you and investigating you, and you're just like a little toy and they're kind of playing with you.
That's so amazing.
It is a very, very, and it just reminds you that there's so much wonder in the world. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I really personally appreciate all of the work that gets done for these nature documentaries. So, I mean, it does, like you were saying, we're all very similar. I like to think like we're all earthlings. And if we all kind of understood that more, and the more we get to see and understand, and the type of work that you do to bring this kind of glimpse into more parts of our planet for people, hopefully the more people get invested in protecting it and understanding, the actual impact of some of these things that humans have done, which, aren't great. But I saw on your website you offer an ocean footage mastery course. Could you talk a little bit about things like that and some of the photography that you offer, and just like apprenticeship, like the things with the learning and what you, with all of your knowledge, are passing on?
Yeah, so I think my mom was a teacher. She taught for like 50 years. I nearly got into academics when I was younger. And I just feel, it talks to kind of privilege and then the potential for leverage now, because to learn the Bristol style of shooting, you have to do an apprenticeship, right? The only way to learn it is by actually getting work on a shoot, and spending 5 years, 6 years, which is essentially what I did I left corporate and I was 36 when I started. So it was quite late for me, but I literally went to the bottom and, I was assisting and making tea. That's kind of how it works, right? In the industry. No one teaches you. You just learn by watching, really, and absorbing, and then you get a chance, and then you show that you're capable. And I just kind of thought, there's so many incredible people out there that can dive incredibly well. They're passionate about ocean conservation. They want to make a difference. So really the whole program is designed to fast track, their development. So really to give them access to the kind of mentorship that I had, or the apprenticeship that I had over a 7-year period, but to give it to them in a much more concentrated form, where if they really apply those learnings, they can learn to shoot in that style, which is just a language. It's a particular style of shooting, so that they can then, take that into a conservation story that they might be working on. So the course is not aimed so much at like obviously, if you want to do what I do, it's kind of, it's perfect for that as well. But it's also great for, so many people, and I've got some incredible people on the program already who are just passionate about, conservation, telling ocean stories. And I think they really enjoy just learning that particular style. So, and I've enjoyed it, just the energy you get from sharing. Roger Deakins, who, I'm a huge fan of, he does a huge amount of teaching and workshops and, podcasts and things like that. So, yeah, I'm obviously still very invested in shooting myself, but I just felt it was time to, give back and develop another thing. And as I said, like the teacher always learns the most. So it's a two-way street, right? Yeah.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. Not only that you're still doing it because you're great at it. I mean, honestly, if you haven't seen the projects that Roger has filmed, please go watch them. They're amazing. They're gorgeous. They're beautiful. I'm so glad that they exist. Also, please keep watching them so that there's more of a demand for them, so more can get made. And thank you so much for not only teaching the sort of next generation of people to do what you do, but for talking with us here today about your amazing experiences and some knowledge that you've gathered over your time doing this. Just really quick, is there anything that we should keep an eye out for as some next projects that you've had a hand in?
Funny enough, there's actually quite interesting. I've been working this year along with Roger Munns. We've worked on a lot of series together. The Real Finding Nemo. So it's for Nat Geo, Disney, and really it's the Real Finding Nemo. So it's you can
complete
imagine
with the death and everything and the goggles.
No,
and
it's obviously it's the real version, right? So there's a degree of latitude for. It's not like an exact replica. But I think it's very interesting, and it's definitely pushing the boundaries in terms of like integrating a different style of storytelling and, very immersive. So yeah, I'm very excited to see how that is received, especially by the American audience, because certainly the more traditional blue chip stuff, I think works so well in places like Europe and Britain, but doesn't resonate as much in the US. And I think that's critical, is that we find a style that does resonate and engage and continues to do that. Build that relationship with nature.
Yeah, awesome. If people want to learn more about you and your projects, where can they go online to find out more?
Well, there's my website, rogerhorrocks.com, and then there's the oceanfootagemastery.com, which is more about the program.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. Definitely, please go check out all of the beautiful underwater cinematography from Roger.
Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, Candice, thanks so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Media Maker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is produced by Sandra Abrams, Candice Block, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio and Ed Saltzman. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakersSpotlight.com for more information.